fields one day. And as he walked along, he could hear the birds singing in the trees and just the sound of the wind going through, you know, everything was lovely and peaceful. But as he walked along, he started to hear this noise coming from behind a bush. So he looked in behind the bush and he saw this leprechaun just sitting and tapping away at a shoe. And the leprechaun was so involved and engrossed in what he was doing that he was completely oblivious to Sean creeping up behind him. But Sean crept up, grabbed the leprechaun. He said, "Tell me where your treasure is." And of course the leprechaun tried to distract him and get him to look here and look there, because if you look away from a leprechaun for even 1 second, he'll be gone. But Sean wasn't having any of it. He kept his eyes on him. He said, "Tell me where your treasure is." So the leprechaun said, "Okay, fine, I'll show him." So he brought him through every bogland and every bunch of nettles and thorns that were in the entire forest, until eventually they got to a tree. And the leprechaun said, "This is where your treasure is buried." So Sean realised at that point he didn't have a spade. So what he decided to do is he got a red ribbon out of his pocket, wrapped it around the tree, and then he looked at the leprechaun straight in the eye and he said, "You promise me now, promise, you will not remove that red ribbon from that tree." And the leprechaun said, "I promise." So at that point Sean darted back home as fast as he possibly could, grabbed a spade, started running back towards the forest, but as he approached the forest he noticed something. Each and every one of the trees had a red ribbon wrapped around it. And those are the kind of stories that we have about the leprechauns. In most cases, you don't get their treasure, unfortunately. But these stories were very important because they weren't just a bit of fun. They also had a moral message to it as well. And the message in that is probably, your treasure isn't going to be handed to you on a plate. You're going to have to work for absolutely everything that you get. And that is a very good moral to have in 19th century Ireland, because that is exactly what people had to do. They had to work for absolutely everything that they got. Now, as well as the leprechaun, another solitary fairy is the banshee. And the banshee, of course, is the harbinger of death. So she's not the kind of character that you really want to have around. But very few people saw her. It was usually that they heard her. But those who did see her described her as having long grey hair down to her feet, a cobweb-like dress, grey skin, and eyes that were red and bloodshot from years of grieving. And of course she would make this keening noise, which was like a crying, wailing noise. And if you heard that sound, that was an indication that someone in your family was going to die in the very near future, unfortunately. Now, even though she wasn't the bringer of good luck, she was also quite a loyal character. And there's actually a number of accounts of people who had to go to the New World or they had to go to Australia, and they actually heard the banshee there. And then weeks or maybe months later, they'd get a letter in the mail saying that someone in Ireland, in their family, had passed away. So she was a loyal character, even though he really just didn't want to hear of her at all. As well as the banshee, there was the puka. And the puka was the most mischievous of all the fairies. Now, he was known in many different shapes and forms, but in Ireland he was generally said to be a black horse with fiery yellow eyes. And he particularly enjoyed being mischievous and annoying and tormenting humans, particularly men who were walking home from the pub at night. And what he liked to do was come up behind men as they were walking down the road at night and sweep them off their feet and take them on a crazy journey around the country. So you can only imagine a poor husband arriving in the door at 5 in the morning saying, "I'm sorry, love, I left the pub at 10 o'clock last night, I said, where?" And then the banshee picked me up and took me on a crazy journey around the country and I woke up in a ditch. I don't know if that would have worked. The belief of the fairies might have been stretched a little too far there, but I'm sure lots of us have tried it anyway. But as you can see, these stories were very important because not only did they have a moral, but they kept people safe as well. You know, if Seamus, we'll say, was sitting in the pub and he was having another Guinness and everybody else was trying to get him to come home and he was saying, no, I'm fine, I'll go home on my own. No, come on, Seamus, or the puka will get you. Then he might be a little more likely to come with you. And of course, it kept children safe as well. And in a number of ways. Because if you think about it, if you tell a child, do not go swimming in that river, what's the one place you can almost guarantee that that child is going to go? Straight into the river as soon as your back is turned. But if you tell that child, do not go into the river or the river fairies will get you, well then the child might be a little less likely to. So children in Ireland generally grow up quite safe and protected, but just mentally screwed up in the head. Another way that we protected the children as well was with boys, because for some reason, as I mentioned to you before, you could be kidnapped by the fairies, and they particularly enjoyed kidnapping baby boys. So, to protect your son, you would dress him in a girl's dress, up until the age of about 10 or 11. And if you don't believe me, there's actually a picture there, just there, from the early 19th century, and as you can see, they're all dressed in dresses. And even today, if you baptise children, you're going to put them in a dress as well, to scare away the evil spirits. And some of you might have seen the movie with Nicole Kidman, The Others, and her baby boy has a dress the whole way through as well. And of course it's the others, it's the other folk, the fairy folk, the evil spirits that they're trying to keep away from the baby boy. So, you know, we really romanticise the idea of the fairies today. We have Tinkerbell and that sort of elegant, lovely fairies. But in those days, everything that happened to you was because of the fairies. And generally, in 19th century Ireland, a lot of things tended to go wrong. So they were something that had to be feared and respected. You particularly respected their music, as I mentioned to you before. But you also had to respect their habitat. And their habitat, of course, were fairy rings or fairy forts and fairy trees. Now, I'll tell you about fairy forts first. These are still all over Ireland today. And they were dwellings that Irish people used to live in at the time when there were lots of raids, like during the night. You would bring all of your belongings, all your cattle and all your animals into this ring fort, which was surrounded by a wall or a ditch in order to protect them overnight. But as it got a little bit safer in Ireland, people moved out of these dwellings, and it was believed that the fairies moved in. So you do not disturb a fairy fort, whatever you do, because bad things will come upon you if you do. And you'll see that Irish farmers will not, if they have a ring fort or a fairy fort on their land, they will not disturb it, because their father didn't, their grandfather didn't, and their great-grandfather didn't, because you have to respect them. And there's loads of stories in Ireland, of course, about people who disturbed a fairy fort and then bad things happened to them. And there's one particular story which is about Seamus Fitzgerald. And Seamus Fitzgerald had a ring fort just outside his house. It was a few metres up the hill from his house. And he decided that he was going to start planting some flowers and that sort of thing in the fort. But he walked up one day with a spade, and just as he was about to dig into the fort, he kind of turned his head because he could hear something, and his house was on fire. So he dropped the spade, ran back to his house, but the house wasn't on fire. So he thought, it's just my eyes fooling me. So he went back up, picked up the spade, just as he was about to dig, again he could hear the noise of burning, and he turned around, his house was on fire. So he dropped the spade and he ran back again. There wasn't any fire. So now he thought, it's definitely just my imagination. So he ran back up again, picked up the spade, went to dig, could hear the noise, but he was like, no, that's just my imagination, dug straight into the ground. And of course, when he went back to his house, it was completely burned down. The fairies had given him 3 warnings, and he didn't pay attention. And there's lots and lots of stories like that as well. And even in modern Ireland, there's still lots of stories like that. You all are probably familiar with the DeLorean. You know the DeLorean car, of course, and they built a factory in Ireland. And we all know what happened to the DeLorean. It didn't do so well in the end. It was a bit of a failure. And some of you might think that it was business, it was economics or whatever, but in Ireland, everybody knows it's because they built their factory on a fairy fort. Now, as well as fairy forts, we have fairy trees. And fairy trees are generally hawthorn trees, and they're lovely and white in the springtime. And it's believed that the fairies dance around these trees to celebrate the coming of spring. And we still, of course, have lots of these all over Ireland, and you don't disturb them, you protect them. And this again is something which we have in modern Ireland, even down in County Clare. I don't know if any of you have been to County Clare in your travels? No? Well, oh good. Well, there was actually a fairy tree just outside Ennis. And the plan for a road which was being built in the 1990s was that the road was going to go straight through the tree and destroy it. But there was uproar about this. And a man named Eddie Lenihan, who's a very famous Irish storyteller, and a number of other people protested in order to protect this tree. And they won. So the road had to be rerouted. So if you're in County Clare now and you're on the Ennis bypass, the road will go straight, 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 around the fairy tree, straight, straight, straight. And thankfully the fairy tree was saved and protected. So yeah, so there's just one more thing that I want to tell you about the fairies as well. I'm going to tell you about my favourite fairy, the Lannon She. The Lannon She was the fairy mistress. And basically what she did was she would seek the love of men, make them fall madly, head over heels in love with them until they wasted away. So I like her style. So, on that note, I'm just going to sing a little bit of a song which is called My Lag in Love because it mentions the Lannon She. Where a lagging stream sings lullaby, there blows a leaf, the twilight gleam is in her eye, the night is on her head, and like a lovesick Lannon she hath my heart in thrall. No life I owe, no liberty, with love is Lord of all. So that's the fairy folk part. So in just a few moments, you're going to get your main course and all that, and then I'm going to introduce some wonderful musicians who are going to perform for you while you're having your food. Okay.